Today's session is primarily for B2C ventures, and we're going to discuss various newer go-to-market strategies, pricing B2C products and services, the role of partnerships, and most important of all, how to build a strong B2C brand. I'm Kanchi Daya from the Indian Angel Network, and joining us today are Mr. Bharat Banka and Brijesh Samantarai. Mr. Bharat is an active member and angel investor at Indian Angel Network and was one of the first few angel investors in Decacorn Oyo Rooms. Mr. Bharat has profound experience in business, strategy, principal investing, mergers and acquisitions, post-merger integration, corporate finance, capital markets, and has donned multiple CXO level roles. As a founder CEO, Mr. Bharat has set up and led the private equity practice for a conglomerate raising $280 million, the largest Indian rupee PE fund in 2008, and built a marquee portfolio in BFSI, consumer, and leisure ventures. In his previous role as head group finance and other CXO roles at the Aditya Birla Group since 1994, he had spearheaded M&A, business and corporate reorganization. Mr. Bharat has also been founder, MD, and CEO, Aditya Birla PE, and senior president, Aditya Birla Group. Brijesh is also joining us today. He is the co-founder of Propelled, an alum of IIT Madras. He started his entrepreneurial journey 6 years ago. Before Propelled, Brijesh co-founded Pristine Cut, which focused on apparel customization. Propelled is a funded startup which works with more than 200 institutes, be it Upgrad, Simplilearn, Edureka, White Hat Junior, the list goes on, and is a market leader in the space of education financing. They specialize in building customized financing products and underwriting methodologies for institutes. Thank you, Mr. Bharat and Brijesh, for your valuable time today.
So, thanks, Kanchi. Pleasure to join.
Brijesh, you're on mute, so maybe you'd like to unmute.
Yeah, thank you, Kanchi.
Pleasure to have you here.
Sure.
So let's go ahead and get started. Oh yes, before we begin, I just wanted to inform the participants of the call, we have kept ample time for Q&A. So as and when we're discussing a particular topic, if you do have any questions, please feel free to leave it in the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen and we'll take them up. And in the meantime, we'll get started with some good introductory remarks. So, Mr. Bharat, from an investor's point of view, we can hear from you first, and then maybe Brijesh can shed some light from a founder's perspective. Say for a B2C company, what are the points a founder should consider before they go to market? And then what are some of the more new and innovative ideas for them to go to market?
Thanks, Kanchi, and welcome everyone, I think, on the call. And it's a pleasure to sort of speak to all of you. So I think first, what I would like to take up is that maybe the starting point itself, for a B2C venture. And typically, I think what I would probably look at is, what is the kind of a product or a service, when I'm catering to the customers, I'm getting into. So even before I think a go-to-market, I think the first question that comes up is, am I creating a new market? Or am I addressing the market in a newer way? So is it that it's a unfelt, unmet need, of a customer that I am trying to solve by introducing a product or a service? Or is it that this need is already there in the market? It is being met by a few people, maybe I think not in the best way, or maybe I have a slightly more innovative way to approach that, or maybe in a differentiated way that I want to sort of cater to that product. So I think first of all, that is a choice, and because that choice will make a lot of difference in terms of how do you approach market and how do you go to market. So that's, I think, the first point that probably, I would like to say as a preemption to even looking at go to market. Maybe Brijesh can add something to that.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Bharat. So I think we should look at it from a more macro perspective, as Mr. Bharat said, because as an entrepreneur, we feel we are smart and there is an entrepreneur bias. By entrepreneur bias, what I mean is we feel, our product, we know everything about our product resonates well with the customer. So we don't, actually look at the basics. I have made those mistakes where I felt, before, Propelled, I had an apparel startup, and before that I was in local, where I felt being an entrepreneur, I know best. So, as an entrepreneur, the first mistake that we somehow feel that because we are smart, we are doing the right thing, and we miss the basics, as Mr. Bharat said. So if the go-to marketing strategy, what is your, B2C, B2, whatever, that is the offshoots of what you really want to build. For example, as Mr. Bharat said, if you are bringing a new product, like for example, Facebook, that was nobody knew about it. So those products, idea is well respected, but when you actually bring out that product, that requires a lot of seeding. For example, Mr. Bharat will agree, when new product is there for a new market and there is no history of that, you need to seed it well. And that seeding may come with huge capital. That seeding may come with, maybe growth hacks, which is very difficult. Second is, if there is a need, then you are coming with the tech adoptions or any, innovations or efficiency to curb that need. That comes up with different kinds of mindset to approach that problem. So we need to first understand what our product is. Is this a new product for new customers, or I'm bringing in efficiency in a old product? First, we need to drill that down. Then we can go into go-to strategy, market strategies, or what is pricing. I think these are all. What do you think, Mr. Bharat, on this?
Yeah, I think what I'm saying that often, I think what happens is that, if you believe that there is a need in the market, for a product or a service, which is not present in the market as of date. As an investor, I think, some of us, when we look at that as an institutional investor or early stage investors, is it too well ahead of time? And because that has its own implications, that if a product or a service is introduced way ahead of its time, and the belief, I think, is that it may take a long time to cure the market, to sort of curate the entire customers and all that. And then whether we have patience and enough capital to back it, for maybe 6 years, 7 years, till the time that the idea will become more vibrant and more sort of viral. And so that, I think, is one thing that, either, to be not too ahead of time and not too late in time. Because, so one is, I think, too ahead in time, I think, is one probably extreme. Second one is that, if your product is already tested in the market, there are multiple players, there is price wars going on that, then really you will have to have a strong proposition. And why do you still believe that you can still come in the market? So those are probably, I think, some of the disciplines, I think, before deciding, because as I said, that some of these landscaping will decide on, what should be your go-to-market strategy.
Agree. I completely agree. I'll just try to give an example. As you said, timing is the most important aspect. So before Propelled, my company was into Pristine Cut, which was in apparel, customized apparel. In that, clue was that in USA, made to measure. Like, we used to send stylists to everybody's house. They used to make, apparel according to the taste. That we faced was people were not. Although we felt, there is a need, and this is pivot it or get into another type, because we felt timing was not right, and that I couldn't realize when I started the venture. So I think timing plays a huge part. Another thing is, it requires a lot of, I'll just tell you the example of Reddit. In bringing any community-based platform, we always see, if I built a social commerce or a social media platform or a community-based platform, growth is huge. But to bring to such kind of things which are very new, it requires a lot of, that seeding will come from capital, or that seeding comes from, I think, people are lucky, or you have to be at the right time at the right place to come at that seeding. So as an entrepreneur, as an entrepreneur, I will advise that if you have such kind of idea, probability of those succeeding are less. I know I don't want to sound harsh, but I think Bharat sir will agree to me that when you're going to a new market, new idea, and you don't have the, either money power or any other bandwidth power to seed it, then it becomes very difficult for young entrepreneurs and they somehow lose way. Bharat sir, what is your views on this?
Yeah, so I think, maybe I'll, lighter tone, I'll give an example of, go-to-market, probably, tried by Britishers, when they had come to India. That's long back, maybe a couple of 100 years back, is that they wanted to sort of seed the market, for tea. And Indians who are not sort of, very adept at, using tea or drinking tea. So that's a point in time, because they thought that it's a large market, I think, and, they should be seeding it. So, they were serving, I think, tea more as a, what you call a testing product. And to incentivize people to test that and then get habituated to it, they were serving biscuits along with that. And then increasingly, that's the way that probably they took, so it's just an unconventional way of, maybe using go-to-market in that sense, that how do you sort of get your customers in? And hence, I think, the customers were smart enough, so when left unattended, I think they would have the biscuit and then leave the tea. So that's again a question that, when that's kind of a go-to-market strategy you are adopting, then you need to make sure that customer is fully on board. I think obviously things have changed a lot. So, you are able to track, on how the customer is responding to your product or service, whether he's adopting or not, whether she's liking it or not, right? And, whether you are sort of spending your market creation budget, I think, on wrong probably. But that's the way that, conventional, I think, go-to-market strategies would say for online kind of platforms. I think you tie up, I think, with online platforms. Obviously, they come at a excruciating kind of economics for you. But then individually, I think initially you have to start. Obviously, at that point in time, you have to make sure that, you are getting on board.
Yeah. Exactly. I'll just share a few examples how how these platforms have also started their early ventures when a new market and new product. For example, Reddit. When Reddit started, initial 1,000 followers were created by the founders themselves. They ran an algorithm where they created fake followers, fake everything. And initially, till the time it reached to a certain level, everything was run by 2 people. But to the outside world, they took that time, they had that tech capability to seed it with fake followers. Second, I think till the time they reached the first few million followers, or the people those who are engaging in their activity, was run by founders. Second, the Y Combinator guru Paul Graham, he posted a couple of Reddits. It required the help of an influencer, because Y Combinator had invested in Reddit. He posted that Reddit after Reddit tab in few of his links, and slowly people came. So one should have the patience. If you are thinking of going that way, one should have the patience. You should think of innovating ideas, or you have to fake it to make it. There are different philosophies which goes behind it. But I believe the success rate are less. There are few Reddits and Facebook, just because we are seeing but most of the people fail. So that is how we have to see this, like at a macro level. Is my idea sustainable enough that without seeding it significantly, can it grow? So that is the call an entrepreneur has to take. Ideas, I know all ideas are brilliant, but when it faces the market, the way it needs to accelerate, it depends on the way you want to take it. So that is, for example, for Facebook also. So generally in the entrepreneur world, what we feel, if we, for example, for Facebook, the clue that we can take is what we feel, that if I want to seed a new idea in a new market completely, it should come from the top. It should come from the top means your initial users should be users who are very aspirational. Like Facebook started from Harvard. So when people from Harvard or Stanford, from the, one of the top Ivy institutions, when institutions or users who were from the lower institutions saw that it is happening in Harvard or Stanford, they started adopting it. Many people how Twitter got its follower because of the initial they seeded with lot of influencers. When a lot of social media platform, they try to bring in influencers, maybe celebrities, who can start seeding that platform, because they bring in their own sort of followers, and that all comes at a huge decent cost. So I think there are challenges in that, but big companies have been built. They find their ways to take this forward. Yeah.
So that's I think very interesting practical inputs. I think, Rajesh. I think another point that I want to bring out for go-to-market is often I think there are these questions around should we sort of take the product to the market when it is not fully ready, or should we sort of wait for the product to get perfected and only then we hit the market. So this dilemma is always there, and I think the doubts are usually around the fact that if I have hit the market with half-baked kind of a product, there are two risks. One is that the customer might already have developed some kind of a view around my product because it is not fully baked, and then probably even later on when you come with a fully featured product, I don't get traction. And the second is this eternal and universal fear in the minds of all entrepreneurs that if I am not hitting the market with a fully baked product, my idea will be stolen. That some other people will get an idea, and then before I can perfect my product, I think some of the others actually will come. They'll improve upon that product where I have done all the legwork, and then they'll come and sort of flood the market with the product, and I'll get left behind. So to my mind, at least personally, I think a question for that would be is that I don't think that you should ever hit the market with something which is not, I think, in a shape that at least I think the customers can give you a feedback on. Because if it is just like a very initial stage of testing, the risks along with that, those kind of products are much more. Now, this is, I think, much more than what VC or a investor jargon that people use of MVP. So I'm not talking about that, because MVP for a VC or for an early stage investor has a different connotation. From a business connotation for the entrepreneurs, I think it is more to do with the fact that what are you hitting the customer with? So on that, Brijesh, would you like to sort of share some of your experiences?
So Bharat sir, this is a typical problem that, every entrepreneur face. So I agree with you. What you, as was your opinion is that we should not go with a half-baked product, but we should go with a full product and launch it. But what Bharat sir, I have personally faced, like in my previous 2 startups, I have come up with with full product and launched it in the market. There I felt I made the mistake. I know there's a fine line between a half-baked product and full-baked product. What I, Bharat sir, personally feel is that, there is never a complete product which you can make and go to the market. The product always comes with experience, how the inputs or the feedbacks which your customer say. But if we don't have a MVP, or if we don't go and test a half-baked product, our entrepreneur bias, which I've already spoken about, which we feel is correct, that bias leads to that product development. And by the time we reach the market and then decide that the product is not working, it takes a lot of energy to again come back and reiterate and start. So what I personally feel, there has to be a mixed balance. You can't go with an idea and say to the customer that, hey, I have an idea, what is your opinion? Nobody, that never works. You should have a MVP which should be representable. It can't be like a very, very half-baked where customer is not being able to use it. It can be used. Your product should be that it can be used in some way. Maybe it may not be a very presentable format, but I feel, Bharat sir, that should be tested in the market. That has been my experience, and you learn from it. For example, as I tell you, for when my first startup was StockUp, that was into hyper local delivery, where we used to deliver everything within 1 hour. Product by product, it doesn't mean the customer facing product. As a product, I mean what initially it looks, yeah, everybody will take it. You just order on the app, but within 30 minutes, you have your delivery boys. For the customer, it looks an awesome product. But because I didn't test it in the market, when I went to the market, came up with all the solution, and then I understood that it's a logistic problem that I need to solve. At the end of the day, Swiggy, Zomato, they're all the delivery startups. And from the customer point of view, these are all beautiful products. They solve your problems. But product is also which are your internal systems. Can this product be effective for the customers? then in that hyperlocal, I realized, after launching the product, that it's a logistic game, how you optimize your logistic, and this will be profitable in scale. Like unit economics only works in scale. But for the customer, for the 50 customers, I initially gave the product, they were all happy. So as a product to the customers was really good. So what I could have done better, maybe instead of spending so much bandwidth on launching the full scale product, I should have tested it by giving it to 50 households, see how my things are done. Then that would have given me a fair amount of idea. Yeah, to bring this product, I need funding. Without this is very difficult. So I, Bharat sir, feel somehow, it has to be a mix. You can't go with a complete product and then, and then try to understand from the market. I think because time has a value, you spend your whole time in building a product and product. I think in version 1, no product is perfect. It comes with feedback from the customers. Again, we'll love to hear your opinion on this.
No, that's, I think, very interesting dimension to, the maturity of the product development and the stage at which you take the product. And maybe I think, let me just link that to one of the strategies around go to market, whether it's a, under development product or, fully developed product, is that one is that often, I think, if you are, as I said, that if you are in the market already, I think on your own, with your own brand name or with your own sort of setup, it has its own repercussions on, when you have touched the market and the customer feedback is coming. This is where I think probably the role of, what kind of channels that you use, what kind of partnerships that you use, what kind of route that you use to hit the market. For an example, that, something where you think that customer might actually be very sensitive around, I think, what you are introducing. There could be 2 or 3, I think, innovative go-to-market strategies. One is that actually you launch something like that in a white label, under one of the established kind of a player who may not be a competitor with you in some form. So it might be a wider sort of a player, who's into multiple kind of products, but his network you could use to launch test your product under a white label name. And you could make it actually an interesting game playing in a sense, to say that, this is a product and we are not disclosing our name today, but let us know, I think, what you feel. And we are introducing 2 versions, so A or B, which ones you like. There are certain advantages of that, the customer actually, when given, I think, 2 new product, I think A or B, there is a inherent, I think, choice to be made. If you have only one, people will say yes or no. If you have 2 in front of you, even if they are similar or same, more likely, I think, the customer is going to come and say that, oh, I prefer A over B. Right. And second thing is that because you have still launched it under a white label kind of a name without, say, revealing your full eventual brand name, so it doesn't have a dent on your brand on whether A or B was bad. So this could be one of the strategies that you could do, right? Which is something little unconventional. Second, I think, personally, I believe that there is a huge role that influencers play.
Yes.
Right. Especially, I think, as I said, that in hospitality, where, I have made multiple investments and, sort of most of them have been successful as a contrast, where, most of the hospitality investments have not done well. And where actually initially when you are introducing a concept, at that point in time, whether that's a celebrity chef or whether that's a celebrity food critic, you take help of them, to sort of seed your product or to sort of test your product and use that as a go-to market, or use their channel, to sort of launch it, whether if some of them are on Facebook, some of them are on Twitter, some of them are on Insta. So you use their network to test product, and that could be another innovative way of go-to market, which is comparatively cheaper. Also, I think there are options where some of these, I think, more forward-looking and modern influencers are fine, and they do understand that a startup like ours, may not have cash to offer to them. And they may be fine to sort of work with us, I think, on a different kind of structures, where if you have a seed investor with you already, they'll be able to guide you on that as well.
Yes.
So this could be, a brand for equity, an ad for equity. It could be a sweat equity. It could be deferred payments, I think, based on what kind of sales do you book over next 3 or 4 years time, to the influencer who's sort of launching you into the market. The advantages of that are few. That, one is that clearly even coming from an influencer, I think people will be more honest and straightforward in giving a feedback. Second one is that because it is coming from someone who's a more known name and known face, people are not that aggressive in sort of giving a feedback, right? So it is more sort of constructive criticism rather than just criticism. So maybe, there are many, I think I just touched upon 2 or 3,
Right.
but, maybe Brijesh, if you have experienced something like that, or you have ideas, please share it with.
Yeah, so I'll give you a couple of my examples how I have with time realized how to acquire customers. So when I started Pristine Cut, which was into it was into customized apparel. We used to go to people's house, stylists. We used to send stylists. They used to give shirts and suits order. It was more on the luxury brand. Like one shirt used to cost around 3,000. Suits used to cost around 12,000 to 15,000. 12,000 to 15,000. There, sir, how I followed initially, I did all the social media gimmicks, Facebook, Instagram. Instagram was not that active that time. Facebook, SEO. But somehow I couldn't get 2 to 3 customers also. Initially, how you start? Initially, you give your product to all your friends and family. First 100 customers comes from friends and family. Then you think, "Arey, everybody is taking my product." You feel happy about it. Then comes the real challenge: how you get the next 101 customer. So there I tried all the Facebook, SEO, and I couldn't get 3 to 4 customers. There I realized that for a early, then what could have been the next step? I have billions of rupees. I put pouring in Facebook campaign. I put getting in celebrities, or as a search suggested a new idea, I might have approached someone. I thought, is there any other way I can get bulk customers? So what we did, we started trunk shows. By trunk shows, we used to go to, we did it in Oyo also, sir. We used to go to on Fridays to all campuses and have our setup there. We used to go to BCG office, big offices where the clientele have salary of more than, good annual salary. 15, 20 customers. There came the idea to me, I am leveraging another channel to get few more customers. That 3 has gone to 20 from a single Saturday trunk show. Then I realized, can I make this 20 to 100? Then I realized, shall I go to colleges, good IIMs and good colleges where MBA first year students wear suits? I can give them customized suits. Then I went to IIM Kasipur and IIM lot of IIMs, and I started getting 1,000 orders. So there the role of that that you are leveraging another business to get more customers. There I started understanding the role of B2B2C. Like you as an entrepreneur, you always try to find a single source. If you put in effort there, can I get some meaty orders from there rather than putting my effort in very disjointed place to get orders from here and there. So there my Pristine Cut experience helped me in, when I started Propelled, I started, and see, now I'll tell you also how that B2B2C went to B2C. I got the, I went to colleges and started giving their clients, I used to get bulk orders. When these students passed out from the colleges, they were mainly MBA students, so their age were 28, 29. They started to get, they wanted to marry, marriage was on cards. So they directly approached me that, can you give a suit for my marriage? So B2B2C eventually converted into B2C. So that was my learning, that when you always try to focus on a point. That point can be anything, maybe partnership, maybe you have a niche customer segment, and try to gather that first few hundred customers. That will give you the confidence, that will keep you start rolling your processes, and then momentum starts building on. So that, and I applied that logic in Propelled also. We don't give B2C loans. We go to the institute. It takes 5-6 months to tie up an institute. But if that product sets up an institute, that opens the channel for next 10 years for me to automatically, reduce the customer acquisition. Whoever customer is coming to that institute is my customer. So I believe if you don't have the, innovative ideas, if you don't have that war chest, you can always find a medium through which you will start getting customers. I think Bharat sir will be best placed to share his experience on this.
No, that's very smart thinking, and I think, very smart way of you to approach the market and sidestep some of the, as I call sharks, I think, on the side, and then still get the thing done. Maybe I think in lighter jest, that's the reason that Indian Angel Network funded you. They knew that they knew that no, you have smart sort of cards up your sleeves. So I think, maybe just extending on that, what I would say is that so while sort of going to market, some of these, if I can call interventions in between, where, one way is, what popularly these days people say D2C, and you go direct to the customer and all. Possible, I think, in some products, I think may not be possible for all. And second, I think the jury is still out on how many D2C products actually are successful and scaled up. Both. Some might be successful, some might have just scaled up but not successful. And especially, I think last 6 or 7 months of pandemic, I think probably is not the right measure, because that's point in time, I think a D2C, lots of products that were launched, I think customers bought that more out of compulsion rather than probably a choice. So while I'm not discounting, I think that as a channel, as a D2C, but I think this interventions, let's sort of expand that scope a little bit, for all our friends, who are there on the webinar, is to, there are various kind of interventions that are possible. You mentioned a B2B2C. So the in-between B that you say, between you and the customer, that also can have many manifestations, and this has to do something with, as typical, I think, businessmen, we would say, is that some of those interventions come at a cost, and some of those interventions, probably if you are smart enough, right, it's a hard way, but if you can bring those interventions without incurring too much of a cost. So I am personally not big fan of, this concept of customer acquisition cost. So I'm not using that changes your CAC and all that. Because typically, I think in some of your, what you call online e-commerce kind of platforms, what you call a customer, who's a customer. Basically, if the person is good for a discount or a deal, he or she is not a customer. And if that is the case, then the second part, that is acquisition, where have you acquired that customer? That's a deal hunter. So I think I'm not going into that, but surely as a intervention channels, some could come, which are inevitable, they would come at a cost to us, as a startup, I think, when we are going to market. The sort of fun and sort of the smartness is in finding, I think, some of those interventions, which costs us close to zero or maybe very minimal. Because, typically having run businesses and acquired businesses and funded businesses for 30 years, what I can always sort of share with, our startups on the webinar are that costs are real and revenue is fictional until it is booked. So that's why I think, when you sort of go to a channel, I think you are committing to that cost right up front. And hence, I think, the attempt should be that with that intervention, how you can sort of do it in a much more interesting way, which is where these partnerships also come into picture. They have their own sort of implications, about our next subtopic also we had to, around the B2C networks is the pricing. Because the pricing would depend on what kind of channels and go-to-market strategy that you are using, right? If you are taking the easy route of, tapping into the distribution networks that the unicorns and the multi-denicorns, and MNCs have developed over decades, that leaves very little margin for you, and that leaves very little pricing power with you. Because, then you are just probably a price taker rather than price setter. So, of course, that is important, but how much of that you use in the initial stages, and how you keep the flexibility to expand that beyond this, because quite a few times I think these kind of distribution networks can also become very sticky, because they may not allow you to sort of move out of that distribution network, because they are smart at it. That's what they have done, I think, for decades. So in that case, I think, how do you build that kind of alternate channels which are not fully dependent on the distribution networks, which leave very little pricing power with you? That's, I think, again, an interesting thought, to say. Brijesh, you have some thoughts?
Yeah, I'll just tell you the current example of how this distribution thing can work in Propel. I'll discuss with you. So for example, I need to acquire customers. So first way I thought is, I'll have my tie-ups with all institutions, and then I'll acquire customer. That was a B2B2C. But then again, the first friction that the first question that came is, in a year we tied up, like now we have more than 350 partnership. We are a 2-year-old company, 2.5-year-old. So in the first 2.5 years, I did set up my business development team all across India. Not a big team, and they used to go to the institutions. They used to speak to the institutions. Sometimes in some institutions, the management takes 2 to 3 months. So all those challenges came. So then we thought, yeah, to reach to through 350 institutions, that is the first thing. I had my own business development team and it did it. But is it scalable that within a month, can I make it 350 to 3,500? The answer that time was no. I can't have that BD. And it takes its own sweet time to create your own business development network to tie up with the institute. Then I thought, let me rely on third parties. By third parties, I mean that all the institutions already use some kind of software, maybe a fees management software, some use a digital journey software, like their Lead Square is a lead management software for all the institutions. There are 3-4 verticals where they use different types of SaaS products. Then I thought, let me tie up with those institutions and then see that how easily I can get access to, those institutions, colleges. As correctly Bharat sir mentioned, I did tie up with, few players who already had those distribution networks, but the challenges were multifold. First was the pricing. They will never allow you to have that pricing power. Second is the chance, if you don't have your distribution system, the chances of, and you don't control the end user, the chances of innovations are very less. You are not at all flexible. So now what I am doing, so these are all phase. First you create your own business development in B2B, then you try to depend on channels that I learned. Then third, I am thinking, can I create a small product which I can easily replicate across all the institutions, maybe solving their own need, and then build my loan product on that. That is my thought process, that I am thinking of creating my different channel. I might succeed, I might not, but that is how the journey evolves. First you try to create, you work in a more bull way. You have your business development, you try to spread it. Then the natural evolution comes, you try for partnership in some ways, and sometimes partnership works brilliantly. But I think eventually you have to leverage on the partnerships and then build your own channel. That I feel is the right way. That many entrepreneurs would have different views, but this is what I feel.
So Brijesh, yeah, sorry, I think Kanchi, you were saying something?
Go ahead. No, so actually I was thinking this would be a good segue into discussing pricing, since both of you all touched upon it briefly. This question is a pertinent question at times. Founders many a times ask that, how much do you think I should charge? Am I undercharging? Can I go ahead and increase it at a later date? So would love to hear your insights on this topic, that how do you think they should, come up with a price for their product, and how does that change over time as well?
So I will leave the practical aspects of that to Brijesh, but I would probably share a couple of things from my large businesses that I have run and the small businesses that I have funded and run some of them myself. One is that it's building a habit in the customer. It's, again, as I said, that there are easy ways to take and there are difficult routes to take. The easy way is price wars and giving discounts, giving free, some of those things. But important thing is to inculcate a habit amongst the customer on why he or she would pay something for your product. You asked a question, Kanchi, that whether someone will be able to increase the product later on. I think the answer is in the question itself. It's almost near impossible for the same product, for you to be able to sort of increase the price in this kind of a competitive market, where the differentiation is very wafer thin between two products or two services. So the only time that you can make an intervention on the pricing is when you are introducing the product or the service. And how smartly and intelligent that you do it, I think is important. We do understand that initially, if you're overpriced yourself, you may not remain in the market itself. So there is a startup that we've just funded about a few weeks back. I think the one thing that I liked about the founder, and then we'll take Brijesh's views also around that, was she mentioned very clearly that initially, she has given a sort of say unlimited use for her service for an annual subscription pack. But she is very clear that this is for initial 50 or 100 customers, which has been made very clear to the customers. And 1 year down the line, when 365 days finish, even these customers know that unlimited use is not going to be sort of the feature of this. There would be a cap. So, you can use it for 50 seats, 100 seats, 500 seats. It may still be lot more than what actually they can consume, but there will still be a cap. I will tell you that in a panel of 2 or 3 people that we were there and co-investors who have invested there, that was the single most point for me which attracted me to sort of fund that particular startup. The reason for that is that you have kept the window wide open, to not sort of shoot yourself in the foot on the pricing. So I'll just stop there. I could go on, but I would stop there because this was just an example that I gave. It's not possible for everyone to follow that, and it's not possible for every product or service to do that. Over to Brijesh.
Yeah, so Kanchi, I'll just give you a couple of, not experience how entrepreneurs think. See, pricing is a very subjective thing. It again depends on the kind of product, is it a new product, is it a new market, are there any incumbents there, is it an over competitive market? So that's a subjective, but what Bharat sir said, what general mistake that we entrepreneurs do, and I have done, is that we feel that, let us undercut, or we don't put much focus on the unit economics, on the pricing. We feel that, price abhi kam hai. When I grow, when I scale, I will increase the price. That is next to impossible. Trust me. I think that is, that is the mistake that everyone do, in forms of discounts. And we feel that is real growth, that is real traction. And when you reach a Series B, Series C level, when you have to turn into profitable, then it becomes very difficult. So most of the, in 2017, 18, you would have seen a lot of matured startups, matured, I mean, who have raised their Series B, C. A lot of in e-commerce companies have failed because of this, that they felt, we'll increase the price, and they couldn't differentiate where the real growth was coming. Discounts or undercutting, and you feel you will do it in future, that is next to impossible. But if you have a roadmap, as Bharat sir said, I know what I am doing. I know, I am undercutting now, but there is a value. I am undercutting to get customers, but there is a value, there is a margin in my product, which I can leverage or turn on and turn off whenever I want. If you have that control, you go with this strategy. But if you don't have that control and you think aage dekhenge, that dekhenge never comes. Trust me. And you are bound to fail. Whoever has funded you, you will see a lot of companies, Reliance are acquiring now. They have fundamental problems, which when retro everybody is seeing, but that entrepreneur bias that we take, we feel what we are doing is correct. We don't look into this fundamentals. And even if you are backed by the best VCs in the world, you are bound to fail. But if you feel you have that leverage, you can undercut, but you have that room, your product has that value proposition, which will give you that higher margins, then that is fine. You are taking an informed decision, but not taking an informed decision, feeling that in future everything will be correct. That is difficult, very difficult.
So if we had to give some practical points, for example, that, okay, I'm out in the market, I've launched, and I want to decide a price for my product or service offering, what are some key points that, a founder should take care of or look at, and then come out to, are there any guidelines for them that you could share? Maybe give an example of how you did it for Propel.
Kanchi, this is actually a very difficult question. Like, what is because this depends on a lot of external factors. Is this an over-competitive market? Is this a product of your kind? So I'll just give you the current pricing problem that we face and how we do it. So we underwrite students, those who, we give loans to students, those who are academically good and have a future, job prospect. We give loans to them. When I give loans to a student who is from a very poor background, pricing is not a problem, because their value is so high that nobody is giving that loan. So the student is really ready to pay a price for it. And the pricing is in my control, although it has to be affordable, but I don't face any pricing challenges there. But when I give to good people, like in Upgrad, I'm saying, just example, Upgrad is a brand name. When I'm giving to good people where good working professionals are coming, there I face the pricing challenges from my competitors, because everybody can underwrite, everybody can give loans to those kind of people. So this is a pricing problem this is a pricing thing from the product, from the customer you are giving. Second pricing thing comes from the market you are solving. If your market, if in a B2B market, I'm just saying, if in a market the power is concentrated in few player hands, they will always have the pricing power. For example, if you're using somebody's distribution to create your product, or you are using somebody else, But if the market is fragmented and your product is something which is good, then I think it's more of a supply demand. Then you have the power. So if your product is such that 80-20 rule, if 20% of the people take 80% of the market share, then they have a say. Bharat sir, I hope I am making sense. I'm not being able to tell this in a proper way. I think you can add. Like, for example, if there are 10 customers and those 10 customers my customers are 10 customers and those 10 customers take 90% of the share of that market, then you don't have a pricing power unless your product is something you are dependent on them to create leads for them. But if there are 100 players, those who are taking 100% of the market, then your product, it's a fragmented market, then you have more pricing power. That is how I have seen. This is just one example. There are other things that can be added.
So, Brijesh, I will add something which may sound very elementary. And that again, as I said, personally, I am a believer and follower of that. That most of the times when you are dealing with customers, it has to be about the customer. I think often I think I would find, and I'm not saying this out of any sort of displeasure. Founders will say that this is what I am providing to customer. The question is not what you are providing to customer. The question is what customer needs. Right. So in sort of jargons or sort of technical lingo, you would say, have you done the problem statement correctly? Right. Have you done the customer segmentation correctly? Let me sort of put that in easier words. That firstly, whose need are you catering? How acute is that need? Because that would decide pricing rather than the other way around. That today I have believed that there is a product that I want to believe, because in my mind I believe there is a need for the product. I would launch it and then I struggle to do pricing. If you have done your background work correctly, that you have identified your customer's problem correctly, then which segment of customers have that problem most acutely, and then can you realistically solve that problem with your product, then you will not have a question of how should I price it.
Bharat sir, one question further to this I want to take from you, because our fellow entrepreneurs are there. How easy is it? How difficult it is? Because it's when you are saying, it sounds very logical that we should do it, but for an entrepreneur to find the right customer, that exercise that we don't generally do, is it easy? I just want to hear your opinion. On a framework, it sounds that this is a perfect solution, but there are few things which one learns in the journey. So how to what is that basic thing that every entrepreneur should do before getting into? My question is that all this what you said, I completely agree, but the challenge that we entrepreneurs face is sometimes we don't have answers to all these questions, like who is going to, and after doing for a year and so maybe we get those answers. So is there any better way to understand this, the right customer with the right profile? Yeah.
No, so I agree with you. I think because again, in a lighter vein, I would say that if you bought a new car, right, and if you would say that all the signals when they'll turn green, that's the time that I bring out my car on the road,
right,
then you should not have bought the car itself.
Right. Yes. So
that's not possible. I agree with that. The question, you actually, if you introspect a little bit and do a little bit of a market study, a large proportion of successful entrepreneurs, and I'm not only saying from the perspective of funding that they have become unicorns or ex-cons or y-cons. Successful businesses would also mean that they are liked by their customers, they are loved by their customers. Some of them have scaled up very nicely. Some rank up very high in terms of product proposition or service proposition. Some of them actually, if you'll go into their history, they would have taken little longer, but they would have done this little more deeper.
Yes.
Right, and they would have started, I think, looking that market may be very large, but let me start targeting and attacking the first portion of the market where there is a bigger likelihood of my product finding acceptance, and most importantly, my pricing finding acceptance, because there is no benchmark. Right. So, and I can give you many examples, on what industries have become large in that way. Microfinance institutions, 10, 15 years back, you wouldn't have heard of them.
Right.
How did that area got created? And I'm saying this, sharing this with Brijesh because you're in education financing.
Yeah.
So where was this industry? Someone thought at that point in time that, there are these people, who don't have access to credit, and they look at interest or the cost of servicing interest in a very radically different way. It's not in percentage for them. They would say that if I need 500 rupees daily, to sort of sell vegetables, if someone can fund me that, if daily a person takes away 5 rupees also from me, I'm fine with that. Because where do I find that 500 rupees to buy vegetables, from the wholesale market to be able to come and sell it? Sounds easy. That 5 rupees on 500 is 365% interest a year.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So for a player who would have thought of that as a MFI, first MFI, whoever would have come in, it was a smart thought, right? He was not fleecing the customer. Customer was willingly paying it because there was a big need. There was very little, I think, products or the services in the market for them to go to. That's how an entire industry got built today.
Yes.
And you have a large MFI which has converted itself into a small finance bank and got listed. So did someone take an easy way? Because at that point in time, there were proliferation and mushrooming of, NBFCs and all that. Everyone wanted to do an NBFC and wanted to lend to this customer who was going to be buying a scooter, right? Or a two-wheeler. So this is an example from your own, I would say, sister industry.
Yes.
So is it easy to do? It's not. But can it be smartly done? Surely, I think there are multiple examples in industries that people have done it, and also in subsectors. Now, if someone doesn't want to do it, they want to sort of learn it along the way, because I think that's also one of the business strategies. Because one sort of peculiar thing about business strategy is that there is no what you call a square box within which a strategy fits. Strategy is what you follow. You start, learn along the way, and make it successful. So for some of them, only thing is that the faster that they can make the learning,
Yes.
speedier, that they can sort of get to that point that I just mentioned. That what's the customer segmentation that I got to? Maybe initially I have started, I'm realizing that 80% of the customers that I'm getting, say only 50 customers, but 40-45 of them actually, have multiple people to serve to them. And, they are not the people who are going to be giving this pricing. But there are this segment of 5. I will study their characteristics. To say there are these 5 or 7 who keep repeatedly coming to me for a product or service. They don't mind paying me this kind of a price. What is this segment, and how can I grow this and balance 45? Can I just dump them?
Yes.
Right. Long back, 25 years back, when I had just sort of started my career, and I was listening to one of the global CEOs of one of large banks, and what he was saying to a small group that we were attending, he said that credit card holders who pay in time are the people who we don't want as customers. And this is 25 years back, Rajesh. And he said, because he's not a profitable customer of me, he's just growing numbers. So maybe I'll keep him with me until the point in time and service that he makes my concept popular. After that, I don't need him. He's not my customer, because he's going to pay every time in time. Actually, I am incurring a cost on him. So that's my way of looking at it.
Agree. So I completely agree to this, that I have done those mistakes, that I have tried to learn things in the journey, but given a chance, I will try to spend more time in understanding the market, at least the basic problem that I want to solve, before I deep dive into it and start the product. That is the mistakes many people make, because of that bias that we know a lot of things and market treats us differently. Yeah, completely agree.
Kanchi, over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So we're running out of time, because we do have a lot of questions coming in. But one last question before we go into the Q&A. It's an important point where, a lot of times companies can price their products based on the value that they create with their brands as well. So B2C companies, building a brand plays a very, very important role in the long term. So what are your suggestions? If both of y'all could just take a little bit of time to cover that. What are your suggestions to founders that are building a B2C brand?
So I'll just make one sort of statement, and then I'll leave it to Brajesh, because he'll have more practical inputs, of what he has faced. Is that typically, I think the brand building and the pricing, I think both go together. And this is, I think, true of, you sort of positioning yourself as an employee as well. So this is on all walks of life, that depending on how you market yourself or how you market your product, builds your brand and then has its repercussions on the pricing. So the only, as I said, I'm repeating myself, is that the only time that you can intervene to make and sort of to take a journey of building a great brand with potential of good pricing and good profitability is not along the way, is at the time of the launch. Because then you would have inculcated that habit in the customer, and then I'll leave it to Brijesh, to sort of share some of more insights.
Kanchi, again, it's, this is a very difficult question, how to build a great B2C brand. I feel, a lot of startups haven't, succeeded in doing that. But what most of the startups have succeeded in, is having a brand recall value. By, when we heard the news of Urban Ladder, but still people have fond memories of Urban Ladder, although business-wise, economically, it didn't scale, and whatever, there are thousands of other reasons. So what I feel is, when you try to create a brand, as Bharat had said, it should be one of your habit. That in a year I am remembering you or recalling you for a particular thing. That is the way. That is the final goal you should reach to. What is the power of that brand? It's again a very subjective thing, but it's very tough to answer how to build a B2C brand. But I feel people should remember you for certain things, that I'm using this for that. And if you ask me how to start it, this is the final goal of building that brand recall, or people remembering you, is whatever you do in your first step, customer is God. So if people ask me, what you are saying is the final step, brand recall, brand value, or how to start. So first, any successful entrepreneur in any B2C brand, they listen to people problem, try to listen to people problem, try to give a solution. So for example, if somebody has started for any company CEO who is starting an early stage in a B2C company, the first priority of that company is to see the complaint mails and what they are doing about it. Till this time, I think till Jeff Bezos had made this a habit. Even Ritesh Agarwal of Oyo does it. I think Bharat sir will. They do. Even Zomato founder, a lot of good B2C brand companies do it. They listen. They listen to the people problem. Even if what we generally mistake is, after first 100 customer we put focus on, and then we think it's another division and we don't take care of. So what I feel, if you try to listen to the people problem and try to find solution, you might not have solution, but try listening to them. Then automatically all the processes that comes along with it, when you try to listen to them and try a solution, that building up that processes eventually goes to that level where your brand is built. So,
Kanchi, I'll just add, one or two points to that, and then, you can leave the field open for Q&A.
Sure.
I think brand building, I think in a B2C brand, is more about emotion rather than about communication. Right? Often it is said that in personal communication also, it's not what you said to someone, but how you said. Right? Most of the times, actually, if someone is criticizing you, that criticism itself is acceptable, probably. It's just the way it is told. So similarly, I think here, I think learning of 30 years in building brands, and I was part of, small part of building large brands like, Idea Cellular or Ultratech Cement, even, most of the apparel brands, I think under Alan Solly or something like that, is that are you able to build an emotional connect with your customer? Does your customer sort of laugh and cry with you? And to an extent, I have a slightly more optimistic view around the fact whether startups have been able to build that or not. In iron portfolio companies itself, I think you'll find quite a few of them. Right? So Wow Momo, I think, is one example. It's a product which was sold, I think, across street on carts. Right? But it has been made into a brand. Right? Similarly, I think, in a different way, I think ID Fresh Foods, that you have. It started with a, South Indian dosa batter brand. And this I can say because I have seen that journey right from, when they were sort of raising their first round and I had met them. And most of the people had this view that, how would a batter be sold, I think, under a brand name. So it was not selling batter under a brand name. It was making an emotional connect. So I think if I can give $1 million statement, I think on this, for the startups to sort of absorb and imbibe, is the way to building your brand in a B2C company is to build your emotional connect with your customer. And for that, there is no one size fits all kind of a solution, depending on what product or service you are in. If your customer, as I said, laughs with you and weeps with you, be sure that you have built a great brand. I stop there and hand it over to Kanchi.
Thank you so very much. Okay, so without wasting too much time, I'll get into asking the questions since we have a limited amount of time. The first question is, any suggestion on marketing a disruptive product to businesses in the B2B2C model? So disruptive in the sense of product differentiation, while there are existing solutions with limitations in the market. I would leave it to either of you all to answer.
Can you repeat the question? I somehow...
Yeah, sure. So any suggestion on marketing a disruptive product to businesses via the B2B2C model? So how do you market a disruptive product?
See, I'll just add few words before. See, when you are going into a B2B2C product and you feel your product is also disruptive, the other thing that most of the people ignore is the inertia of change. For any B2B company or any business to change, from one product to another product, that's very tough because all its ecosystem players are ingrained in that. So when you are bringing a disruptive product, either two few suggestions, either you bring in a small product which can encompass with the, existing solution, or your product is such that the inertia for change is very less. So most of the B2B companies, they don't try to, change the product which is already there. They try to build a product on the existing systems. So what we feel is that my product is disruptive, but we neglect the fact that while trying to change a company's behavior from your product to other product is very, very difficult. Either you collaborate or a built product on top of that, or your product is so smooth that switching cost is very minimum, but that's very tough, because there are legacy systems which are built, and legacy system also involves people's emotions, that they are acquainted to that kind of product. So a disruptive product, it might sound disruptive, but changing a business behavior has to be done smartly. Bharat sir, your views on this?
No, I can just add that, there is if there's a self-realization that it's a disruptive product, then I would say that why do you need a B2B2C route? Because, then again, as I said, that may be a slightly difficult route, but then if you are sure, and, maybe if your initial testing has suggested that it's a disruptive product, then why do you want to bring an intervention in between? Because to an extent, I think it brings its own dilutions and its own limitations on what that intermediary or the intervention would do. So to my mind, I think, this question is a little bit of an oxymoron in that sense, that if you are a disruptive product, I would believe, if I were you, I think, I would sort of touch my customers directly rather than actually going through some of these routes in between.
Okay, thank you. So the next question is more towards pricing, and I'm going to merge a few questions that have come through so that we can answer them together since they're on the same theme. One is, how important is it to focus on unit economics from the start of the business and the application of it in fixing the price of the product for the first time in the market? And then some subsequent questions are more aligned towards, there's this dilemma between, should we scale and spend a lot of money initially, or should we focus on profitability and scale and limit, the pace at which we scale? So how should they find the right balance between the two?
So what is the first question?
How important is it to focus on unit economics from the start of the business? So when they begin, the importance of focusing on unit economics.
Yeah. So Bharat sir, you will like to answer first, or how do you
No,
want
sure.
to?
I'll take that. I think because that question has again two components to it. One is that I think if I heard the question correctly, I think what was asked was, uh, how do I sort of get my unit economics? Should I focus on my unit economics or should I focus on my pricing?
Yeah.
To my mind, I think if you look at the basic of financials, I think your unit economics will be governed by two factors, which is pricing and your costing, right? Because eventually, I think your economics are coming out of revenue minus cost. So the inherent question, I think, in the question that you have asked is that unit economics should determine pricing or the pricing should determine unit economics, right? Now, so that I think is again a point that if you let your costs escalate to an extent which are uncontrollable and which are irreversible, no matter on what pricing that you do going forward, your unit economics are ever going to make sense. And maybe I go back and repeat myself what I had said earlier, is that costs is reality and revenue is fiction until realized. So I think in that I would say that you have to do a good balance between the fact that your pricing has to be affordable, but it should not be discounted to that kind of an extent just to acquire customers that eventually you just keep sort of adding customers to your list. You have neither acquired them nor have they contributed. In a longer run to medium run, obviously, I think unit economics is the one which is going to make you a sustainable business because no VC or no private equity in this world can keep funding your losses for 10 to 15 years. Brijesh, you have some thoughts on that?
No, I completely agree with you on this, Bharat sir. See, what I feel, the button, the tap that when I will turn profitable, because I'll add that profitability and scale that to this question. That button or tab when I will add when I will be profitable, that button, that power should be with you. So fundamentally, nobody is expecting a seed startup to be profitable at day zero. You grow, you acquire customers, you spend money, but fundamentally your business should be such that if you want to turn the tap on and be profitable in the next year and so, that fundamental aspect should be there. For example, I'll just give you. I have done two kind of business. One is lending. One is into apparel. Lending and apparel business are fundamentally profitable business. Lending has been in this industry since since ages. Like it's an old age custom. So if you are doing a business in lending, if you're doing a lending business and you are saying unit economics wise, it's not making profitable, but I'll be profitable when I grow up, that doesn't make sense. So certain business you should our unit economics wise should be profitable from day zero. That idea you should have. But if you say in WhatsApp or chat, or even what is the company which is the TikTok, there the whole motto was I need to acquire customers.
So, Kanchi, as Brijesh's screen has got stalled, I think I'll take
I
the
will
second part of the question.
and
I think
I'll
the
acquire those 1,000 customers, and then there nobody expects 100 crores. Hello.
British, we lost,
I
actually,
think
internet connectivity was a little weak for the last 30 seconds.
So
yeah.
I think, Kanchi,
okay.
what I was saying, the second part,
So
I think what you had asked, someone had asked, was that should they be focusing on profitability or scalability?
Correct.
So, again, a view on that is that, and that's conventional, unconventional startup businesses, online commerce, whatever businesses,
Yeah.
is that profitability and scalability are not twin tracks of a railway line,
Sure.
right? That they don't have to meet and you have to choose one.
Yeah.
I think both have to intersect each one at some point in time. And in each organization's what you call life cycle, there are times of say 2 year, 3 year, 5 year when you are focusing on growth, and at that point in time you are willing to sort of compromise on profitability a little bit, because that's how the organizations grow. And then there are times where I think, you would say that at this point in time, incremental scalability that is coming to me is making me lose too much of money. And hence at this point in time, I will focus on profitability. And this is not that it's a static curve, which goes from 0 to 100 years of a life cycle of a organization. It is sort of a zigzag in that sense. Now, question is that, for a startup, obviously one understand that just like a manufacturing factory also, that when you are setting it up, it takes 2.5 years, 3 years to set it up. At that point in time, you are out of pocket. You are capitalizing that. Some other consumer companies don't have benefit of doing that. But eventually, after 4th or 5th year time, you will start making profits. You will get to 100% capacity. And then you would say, now I need to increase my capacity. You raise more money, you compromise on profitability to accommodate new volumes, and then so on and so forth. So even for, I think, an entrepreneur, I think, as I said that, who would keep funding your losses for eternity? If someone can, you are extremely lucky. So,
So, sir, am I audible, Mr. Virat? So, what general mistake that we entrepreneurs make is, we always avoid this pertinent question and say, "Isko future mein dekhenge, kab profitable honge." So, what I always suggest is, as an entrepreneur, you should be cognizant. Yeah, as said, there are different phases of a business. That at this phase, I require, I don't need to require profitability. I need to grow. I need to set my business, but you should have that control or that roadmap that I can be profitable, and that fundamental economics should make sense. That should be done from day zero, that whether my business is fundamentally viable or not. Whether I am taking the road of profitability is a question that I need to take 3-4 years and different phases through an entrepreneur company goes, but fundamentally it should make sense. We somehow ignore that questions and keep it till later stages.
Lovely. I'm just going to take one last question since we're running out of time, and maybe we could take the others for the subsequent sessions that we have planned during the series. So since we're talking about pricing, you've touched about it during the talk as well, but if you could briefly, answer the specific question. So what should the pricing strategy for a new FMCG food products company be? Should they look at competitive, cheaper product pricing versus, or should they look at a bit of higher pricing, which leaves margin to give, dealer commissions so that they can promote their products more? So which of the two options would you all recommend they opt for?
So I think, again, Kanchi, I may preempt this. I think it depends on what you are selling. Are you selling avocado or are you selling a cucumber?
Okay.
That will determine what pricing you do, because you have both. I think something like a food hall or a Nature's Basket also existing, right, catering to a segment, and then with a premium pricing and with higher operating margins but lower volumes. And you also have, I think, all the retailing, food and grocery retailing outlets, which are selling cucumbers, tomato, and potatoes. So that's selling volumes and doing that. So my point is that it has to do with what product, sort of FMCG food product that you are launching. And in general, I think a principle would be that if I'm sure that product may already be available in the market. If you are putting it, I think, in mass consumption in underserved area, I think it will be competitive on pricing so that you can achieve volumes faster. If you are launching it, I think, in more upmarket areas, right, with a sort of premium price, with a premium product features, I think then obviously you have to be in that category. Because always, I think, a dilemma is about what you call this mass luxury product. That if you are in between, then you are taking your chances.
Rajesh, one last question to you as well before we close. This you will relate to, for a founder who's not raised their initial seed capital and they don't have enough money for social media sponsored ads or campaigns or influencer marketing. What are your suggestions to introduce people to the product or mobile app or their service offering?
Yeah. This is a very, I think this is a very relevant question. Like, I think most of the founders don't have initial seed capital to, have influencers or do social media marketing. So initially, what I feel is, what we generally do is we take the friends and family route and think that they are the first customers. But somehow I did that in couple of in one of my startups. But I think that is the route that we take. But I feel that is not the right way, because we somehow have biased opinion on this. We feel that we have sold a product, but somehow they take it because they are friends and family. But I inherently feel here the founders hustle. This is a very difficult question to answer, but I feel, here the founders hustle comes. As an entrepreneur, to get into that initial entry, I'll tell you how I started. I'll just tell you how I started. I think that live example will help. When I was into lending, and as a lending is a space where people have to have that trust factor, and I didn't have that background. Now, so when there, I just tried to find one good institute, and I tried to convince him. That was Ivy Professional First Data Science Institute. I took my background that I am from a good college and I want to do. I reached out to 100 institutes. One institute agreed. So reaching out to that 100 institute is that hustle that one founder has to do. I need, and one of them agreed. I went there, stayed there for 3-4 months, and built my product over there. So I know it's a very difficult job. There is no yes or no answer, but you just have to use your circle, do that hustle, reach out to people. You'll find a way, and you'll find your initial customers to do the product with. But that requires little hustle. Somehow we feel that that jump has to be made. That am I taking that step to do it? But I think it has to be. You have to keep trying, and you'll find your way. There is no fixed answer to this, but as I did, I wrote to 100 institutions, 99 said no, one agreed, and there my product started flying. And the same way you raise fund, you write to 1,000 people, try to speak to them, you will find 1 or 2 people will be interested and take your luck in the product, and you might try your luck. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Kanchi, I'll just add maybe very quick, I think half a minute to that. I think, it also has to do with the determination of the entrepreneur, and to an extent, if I can call, shamelessness.
Yes.
I can quote, very quick, I think, old example about myself. I think way back in late 80s, I think, one of our family members, they had tried to bring tofu in India, unheard of. And he gave us a challenge, during my college days, when we were in summer vacation, to say that you have to go and get me a few customers on this, right? And this is your incentive. Now, where would you sell, I think, a tofu, when someone doesn't even know what tofu is? So, I hired a two-wheeler scooter, Chetak, right? And on that, I and sort of my colleague, I think we went from one tabela to another tabela and went and told them that, what, this is soya paneer that we have. So at least do one thing, that on your, where you sell your paneer, I think just put this next on the shelf, and then we want just feedback. So I can guarantee out of 20 tabelas that we sort of visited, I think 15 of them, they just shooed us away. 5 of them chose to sort of keep it. 3 of them actually next day returned all our stock. 2 of them gave us a feedback. They said ki refrigeration mein, when we keep it, then this turns very hard. I think that was, again, as I said, $1 million feedback for us when we went back. Second thing is that in Bombay's Catering College, we went and told them that give us a stall in your next exhibition that you have. We will fry tofu pakoras and sell it to people and ask them whether they can make a difference. This all needed determination and shamelessness, because people will just kick you out. So I can just add that I have gone through this, and it was fun, I can assure you that.
One thing, I was looking at the Q&A answers, there are a lot of specific questions. To be very honest, my personal, entrepreneurs are not consultants. They don't have answers to all questions. Like the questions that people are asking, what is my G2M? See, there are some broad consensus that we spoke about, that you should know about the product, but you are best placed to discover it. If all these answers we could have answered, then we would have gone and created that product. I know the takeaways is that you look at the broad parameters, what Bharat sir and what I have experienced, but the fine answers only you can say. If you are not being able to tell that, then there is a problem in your research, or maybe you are not best placed to do it. Or what do you say, Bharat, so like, because I feel, there are different set of problems, different set, there is a broad contour in which they should work. Like basic fundamentals should be taken care of. But very specific questions, if somebody is asking, it means there is some lacking in the research, or they are not willing to take that extra step, that do that hustle to find the answer. And that differentiates an entrepreneur from a consultant. A consultant has all the answers in the book. But yeah,
No,
this is what I feel like.
what I would say is that I think there are never silly questions. I think there can only be silly answers. So
Right.
I think point is that the fact that people have taken pains to ask these questions, meaning that they have a pain point, right?
Yes, yes,
Now,
yes, agree.
I would say that in a half an hour to 45 minutes time, my attempt would have been to cover as much of it as possible, and some of which had generic answers to provide them that. Some, wherever, I could sort of elicit your response and your interest to answer with anecdotes and examples so that people can make their own conclusions whether that fitted to them or not. And some actually very specific questions one will need to sit personally with people and understand on exactly what is the pain point in that context and then solve it. So generic answers will not probably answer all the questions, but I would say that will give probably a guiding light. And some of the examples and anecdotes that we have quoted probably I think are more apt, for people to understand that these are similar problems and for which what kind of routes were taken, not that they were the exhaustive and all-inclusive kind of answers and solutions to that.
All right, great. I think we're running out of time. So thank you so very much, Brijesh and Mr. Bharat. I think it was very, very insightful session, and it'll surely has given a lot of practical solutions to the founders to go back to the drawing board and maybe look at or evaluate and see how they can incorporate that into their business and see faster growth. So thank you so much once again for your valuable time today. Truly appreciate it.
And thank you to all the participants for sort of taking time out and spending this kind of time with us. And really regret that we were not able to attend to all the questions because of the time constraint. But we are very thankful that all of you actually took the initiative to come and spend this kind of time.
Lovely. So to all our founders on the call,
Yeah, sure.
If you're looking to raise capital or connect with the speakers, feel free to write to me. I'll be more than happy to take you through the process or connect you to either of the speakers. I'm pasting my email ID in the chat box below. It's kanji@indianangelnetwork.com. And as you know, this is a series of sessions that we have every Friday at 4 o'clock. So the next session is on scaling a B2B business. We've already covered the 0 to 1 journey on building a B2B brand. And now we're talking about scaling a B2B business. So we will be covering topics like scaling it in India, what are the strategies for growth globally, how do you create excitement within your team for growth, and what are the newer strategies for sales and service, and how do you go about and build a strong B2B brand. So the speaker for that is Mr. Ajay Chaudhary. He is the founder and former chairman of HCL Infosystems. So yes, we're looking forward to seeing you next Friday. And in the meantime, have a wonderful weekend and see you next Friday.
Sure. Thank you.